Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Angus Barnes and I'm the Executive Chair at the Wine Communicators of Australia, and I will be your moderator here today. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm hosting and recording this webinar from the lands of the Wangal people of Western Sydney. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. This webinar is Understanding the Media Landscape and Media Engagement, and we're incredibly fortunate to have 4 leaders in the world of wine communications here with us today. I'll introduce them all, starting with Nola James. Nola is the lifestyle editor and food wine writer with 12 years experience in publishing and news media, and she's based in Tasmania. Her work appears in Qantas In-Flight magazine, Delicious magazine, The Age, Sydney Morning Herald, Singapore Airlines Priority magazine, Mercedes-Benz Me, Halliday Wine Companion, Jetstar and Virgin In-Flight magazines, Time Out Melbourne, and Australian Travellers, amongst others. Nola was a finalist in last year's Wine Awards last year. Next up, we have Max Allen. Max Allen is well known to us all, but he's an award-winning journalist and author and lecturer in wine studies at the University of Adelaide. Max has been writing about booze for 30 years. He's the wine and drink columnist for the Australian Financial Review, long-time contributor to Gourmet Traveller magazine, Australian correspondent for JancisRobinson.com, and a regular presenter at masterclasses and festivals around the world. His latest book, Alternative Reality, How Australian Wine Changed Course, is out now. Noting Max has previously won the overall WCA Wine Communicator of the Year award. Next up is Tom Kline. Tom's an award-winning wine writer, reviewer, educator, judge and presenter based in Victoria. He's the Australian contributor for Jasper Morris Inside Burgundy, reviewing and writing about Chardonnay and Pinot Noir for Jasper's global Burgundy audience. He also contributes to the likes of Decanter Magazine, Wine Spectator, Halliday Magazine and Selector Magazine, as well as various other publications in Australia and abroad. Tom is on the reviewing team for Wine Pilot and is also a Western educator and author of consumer-facing wine courses. In 2023, Tom was announced as the winner of the Best Published Feature Article or Wine Column at the WCA Wine Communicator Awards. And lastly, Brian Chase Olson. Brian lives in Sydney and is the director of Blend Public Relations Company. Brian has extensive experience in public relations, having worked in public relations for both in-house wine companies, such as Taylor's Wines, as well as agencies such as Liquid Ideas and Love PR. Brian also happens to be the chapter chair for the New South Wales chapter of the WCA. Brian has also won WCA Wine Communicators Awards in the past through his work with Taylor Wines. So before we get started, just letting you know that today's webinar will be recorded and a link of this recording will be available on the WCA website. We've allowed plenty of time for questions you may have to be answered at the end of the webinar. However, feel free to send them through to us as they come to mind. And the way to do this is at the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A tab and you can type the questions directly into there. So let's jump straight in. I'm going to ask a series. So the way it's going to work is going to be a series of questions. I'm going to probably nominate one of the panelists to answer the question, but then invite the other panelists to join in. And again, if you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A button. So let's start. How can wineries engage with the wine media? Probably the big general question. I'm going to start this one with Tom.
Thanks, Angus. I suppose on that point, I don't want to trivialise the crux of this discussion, but I think the way to engage the wine media is to be considered, but to certainly not overthink it. I think that's a big thing that happens. A lot of people overthink how to do this. I think it's a matter of finding the people that you connect with and align with, whether that's the content they provide or the audience they have, and reaching out with transparency. You know, I'm sure the other panelists would agree. I welcome an email from someone that just wants to start a dialogue and tell you about what they're doing. We're all here because we love wine. And, you know, I love getting these emails from people saying, you know, we just wanted to get in touch and start a dialogue and go from there. And whether things pan out in the short term or not is another proposition, but it does put, you know, them in the psyche of a writer. And then I suppose during that process, I would think just transparency is key. Oftentimes people will reach out and you're still not really entirely sure what they're after. So reaching out with transparency and saying, look, we'd love to get some reviews, or we're really interested in this publication, and starting that dialogue, I think is it's quite a simple way of doing it. It sounds a little bit reductive, given what we're about to talk about, but I think that's at the core of it. And I think also, just to add to that, it doesn't always have to be when you've got something you're releasing. It might be good to start a rapport 6 months ahead of sending wine, or start that discussion. We're just people that have relationships. And I think having even some sort of lukewarm connection helps before samples come in and there's something that is sort of tangible and that you want to have published. So those are my initial thoughts on how to kick off. But yeah, transparency and honesty, it's just about lines of communication.
Okay. How competitive is wine writing? Do you guys like each other? Do you work together? Do you swap ideas? Maybe I might start with Max on this one.
Well, there's a reason why we're doing this over Zoom, because we can't stand to be in the same room as each other. No, that's obviously not true. Look, if anything, there's probably a little bit too much bonhomie between wine drinks journalists when they get together. I've just come back from a amazing junket through Japan with some drinks journalists from Singapore, and I've never met these people before. They're from a totally different country, totally different media market, and it's like by the end of those 5 days, we're all best friends and could spend another 5 days or 5 weeks with each other. So there is a lot of goodwill, I think, amongst drinks journalists. I could be naive in that though, but maybe somebody else should answer that.
I'll pick up on that one as well. I think definitely Max is right. What we all have in common is a love of wine, and we all love to drink wine, and wine is always well drunk with other people who like to drink wine. But it's a very small industry. There are really not a lot of writers that specialize in wine specifically. So we do know each other. We meet each other, be that a whole bunch of us kicking on after last year's WCA Awards out together, or going to a tasting together. It's a small crew, so we tend to, I think, support each other and share leads and share stories of things that haven't worked out, or things like that. We have to support each other. Really.
Having said that, though, and we'll touch on this later, I think, if I can get the story before all you bastards, then obviously that's a good thing, right? So there is a certain competition in being the person to publish the first story about whether it's the new hot producer, or whether it's a new trend, or whether it's old-fashioned breaking news like a business going under, or there is a certain amount of friendly rivalry, I think, there in getting those scoops. But we can touch on that later.
Healthy rivalry.
Healthy rivalry.
Yeah, I think that's understanding from amongst you guys the breaking news versus the general lifestyle news, which is maybe not so breaking or time sensitive. That understanding the media channels and how they work is where you're going to find that sort of competition.
So what are the key ways that wineries can communicate with the media? Maybe I might start that with Nola, but then follow it up with Brian.
Well, the second answer we'll leave for Brian, because that's to get someone who works in public relations professionally to help you. But from a one-on-one sort of non-PR way, you can just email us. You can maybe don't call. No one likes to call much anymore, but we're not scary and sitting up in our glass towers and ignoring the people that make the product that we write about. At the end of the day, it's our jobs to know what's happening in the industry, and we generally do want to know. And if a winery comes to us and says, we'd love to tell you about XYZ, it might not be something that ends up on the front cover of the newspaper, but it's still of interest because this is an industry that we all specialize in. So, I think everybody on this panel has a website, and they all have a web form and an email address, and we're all on social media, and it's okay to just say, hi, can I tell you about this?
to be clear, I actually do have a glass tower. Just I want everyone to know that. But I think the social media thing, like heaps of people reach out on Instagram, and that's fine. It doesn't bother me at all. I mean, some people may not like that. Maybe they don't check it as often. I'm not sure. But if they haven't happened across my website, you know, which is on my Instagram for that matter, but you know, a direct message on Instagram is by no means offensive or problematic as long as it gets seen. So it's all pretty casual. And yeah, I think the key message here is how receptive we are to hearing what we want to hear about these things. And we'll go into obviously the methodology for that and the good and bad examples, I suppose, but we're all pretty open to hearing what's going on, I think is the key.
Mm. And from our perspective, like we're a specialist agency, so we're quite lucky in that we are kind of on call for journalists whenever they kind of need anything. If they have a certain story where they need a certain producer, we get either emailed or called or Instagrammed whenever. But on the flip side, we're working with our clients on specific stories to then take to people like Nola and Max and Tom or any other media that we know where the story is going to fit. And then we curate a pitch around that for our clients. So engaging a PR company is definitely a very key way that you can communicate with media, because hopefully your PR agency knows the channel they're speaking to, what's going to land in that space, and the best way to approach it.
So I see 3 nods there. So you're all comfortable with dealing with the PR agency?
It can be very, very helpful to have agencies to go to. I'm sure the others will agree with me here, but there are certain PR agencies that I work with more than others, usually because the sort of work they do aligns with the kind of work that I do. And, you know, sure, I'm not going to be able to cover every press release or respond to every email that I get, but like many things in this world, relationships really are key. And when you hire Brian to help you launch your new cellar door, for example, you're not just paying for the press release and the media release, you're also paying for the relationship that Brian has with us, because I know there are people out there that I see their email in my inbox and I'm not like other PR people, I'm like, oh, here we go. This will be interesting. You know, what is this agency working on at the moment? Because I know they have great clients. So it is, yeah, it's a skill to have a good PR person working for you.
I actually had a really good experience recently. I'm not saying this because Brian's on the call, I promise, but I had a tight turnaround on an article for Wine Spectator in the US. It was a news item, so it was pressing and, you know, all that stuff. And I needed quotes in a heartbeat, and quotes can be the thing that chew up real time, especially if it's vintage and you have to, you know, feel bad about emailing someone saying, I'm so sorry, but can I have some quotes? Or, you know, I went to Brian, I knew he had a certain array of clients that could sort of talk to this issue, and he was all over it and back in a heartbeat with all these quotes and imagery and all these things, you know, so quickly. It was just made it so much easier for me instead of me having to chase people. And so, you know, obviously, you know, I was thinking about the analogy of the artist and the manager or something. You know, obviously we want to connect to wine people, and obviously you've got the resource of the PR agency there for, you know, the sort of extraneous things that are so hard to get otherwise. So it's obviously a balance, but in a case like that, that was a game changer. Sort of saved me. Thanks, Brian.
I think one of the things we're going to keep coming back to is it depends. In some cases, having a personal relationship with the producer, whether it's the winemaker, the owner, the viticulturist, it kind of depends on the angle. It is definitely the way to go. In some cases, depending on the angle, depending on the product, depending on the story, you're going to need professionals who are going to be able to do exactly what Tom just outlined, just be able to turn around that stuff, which you as a producer don't frankly have time or the resources or the wherewithal to do because it's not your job. There are some producers that I've got a relationship with that if they suddenly started using a PR company, I'd be suspicious. Because I'm like, well, that's not right. That doesn't fit with how I understand that producer. And there are some producers that I thank God they've used a professional PR company because I know how hopeless they are with all the stuff that Tom just outlined. You know, I need high-res pictures. I need this, and I need it tomorrow because that's my deadline. There's some producers that I might not even consider writing about in that column because of that tight deadline, because I know they couldn't provide that. right? So it's actually, in that case, getting a professional would be enormously beneficial to them. I'm still going to write about them, but it might not be in that tight turnaround kind of deadline. So it all depends.
And Max, maybe teasing that out a little bit for, what do you think the role, and maybe I should have asked this right up front, what is the role of the wine media, and how does this differ to the way that a wine business works? Because sometimes I think a wine business is interested in selling more wine, whereas perhaps you're interested in telling more compelling stories.
I think that's the most fundamental question that any person who is involved in the production of wine needs to ask themselves before they even think about approaching the media. You need to say, what do I want to achieve with this communication, and how is the best way, what is the best way to achieve that? So if you want points and you want scores and you want reviews and you want it turned around quickly because you've got a whole bunch of wine you want to flog, don't talk to me. That's not the kind of article I write. But you need to know that. You need to do your research. If you're trying to attract a certain audience, maybe getting some hugely popular TikTok account person who does 30-second reviews of wine, that's who you need to be talking to, not me. If you want to talk about the wonderful heritage of your family-owned winery that goes back generations, and you've got an angle that you've never revealed to the world before, talk to me, don't talk to Tom or Nola. Right? But you need to know. So it's a bit like anything, you know, people who are wanting to get into writing, you know, one of the first things they'll be told, creative writing, novels, whatever it is read widely. You need to read to understand the landscape. So you need to have a better idea of what's out there in the wine media landscape than I do, because I am in this glass tower, just like Tom. You know, long form, generally longer form newspaper writing. That's the fundamental of what I do. That's totally different to what the Wine Front do, what Tom does in many ways, although there's some crossover. You know, you need to ask yourself, why do I want to engage the wine media? And that answer to that question leads you to hopefully the right place. That's probably not a great answer. So other people should add to that.
Well, I think I'll expand on that quickly. I think one thing that I've learned as a relative newcomer to writing, and 3 and a bit years in, or if that, is a lot of people have media lists that have not changed in 20 years, you know. So, you know, they're still sending the same things out to the same people and expecting maybe change. And obviously the landscape's changed so much. There are new voices, there are new platforms. So that's something to consider. And I would suggest, I know that WCA probably can provide something on this actually, but I would suggest that, to Max's point, you don't just update your list. You update your list with some notes as to the style of the publications, the style of the writing, whatever you want to do next to each person, so it's a little bit more targeted, because that's a big part of the efficacy of this, you know, and being a bit more rigorous in how you approach things.
So again, it leads on well to the next question. Talking about target audience, how is that different from each of your perspective? And is it important for a wine business to understand your target audience before they pitch you some stories? So someone might be writing from a travel magazine or a consumer magazine or a trade magazine. How does that differ? Maybe I might start with Nola, because you have an extensive list of people you write for.
Yeah, I think target audience is an interesting one. I sort of might flip it and make myself the target audience for wineries. So if you were a winery and you're sort of, you know, okay, I'd like to engage with Nola because I like the kinds of stories she tells, but I don't score wines. It's not part of my repertoire, mostly because I don't really love going to wine shows and drinking 100 red wines in one day and then, you know, putting a number next to them. We are all storytellers here, but I'm more about how the wine got into the glass and not what is in the glass. Obviously, certain elements of quality would always come into play there. So I'm freelance. I often work really long leads. So, you know, as Max was saying, if you have too much of a particular kind of wine and you need it scored and out there, I'm not the person for you. But also if you have a wine event coming up that you're struggling to sell tickets to, I'm also not the person for you. And that's not really common knowledge in this, because it's a sort of a media thing, but publications don't ask freelance writers to write about content that isn't evergreen. Evergreen meaning content that would always sort of be around. So, you know, while it's lovely that I get all these press releases about events, I'm not going to cover them. And sort of that intimate knowledge of what one person would write about and what one person wouldn't is really something that's helped along by PR support. Like, you know, Brian would know all of these things about all of us. But, you know, sometimes I'm not sure who my target audience is. Is it a, you know, high-flying story about Rioja for Qantas magazine, which is something that I'm working on today? Is it a story about a little producer in Tassie that's just opened their own Salador and won some awards? You know, it's so fluid and moving, which I guess is why we don't mind if you just ring us and tell us what you want us to know, I guess.
Okay, maybe I might ask Tom a question. And again, we did a little bit of homework before this webinar. And again, my question to you, Tom, is what do you mean by the phrase exciting versus insular in terms of wine writing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it comes back to, again, just making sure that you really have self-awareness, I suppose, as a producer, if you're going out to the media. I think that we've all received press releases where we've read a bio that's been on a website. You know, it's like we started in 2004 and this and that, and that's all well and good. But within the context of us, it's like, well, we need some hook, some little bit of excitement and angle. And if a press release doesn't have that, it's just you're sort of just reading a bit of a blurb about someone. So what the exciting versus insular things it touches on is maybe there's something you've worked on for 5 years that's really exciting internally. And I get it because it's all consuming and it kind of is exciting, but is it exciting on a bigger scale? Are we going to hear that news and go, wow, you know, if you've, I don't know, farmed part of the vineyard in a certain way, that's great. But is that news? I mean, is that sort of going into the ether of many others that are? So I think it's just about really trying to step back a little bit and just make sure that what you're sending us is exciting to a broader audience, rather than just something that you put 150 million hours into, but which has, kudos, but is it going to be exciting to the person that picks up whatever magazine? So I think it's just a matter of just, self-awareness and getting some perspective before you send something out. So, I think Nola or someone at some point said to hold the press release, just hold it for a minute and actually step back and think about that. Because, I'll just add to that. If we receive a press release and there's nothing that comes out of it, I think there is still some, there's still some advantage there. Like if I get a press release from X producer that's just says we're releasing these wines, then at least they're sort of in my psyche. So I'm not anti press release that perhaps isn't, maybe I'm contradicting myself here, targeted to what I do, but it still does mean you're getting some sort of consciousness across the media landscape.
Can I get some insight here from Brian? When you're consulting to your clients, do you instill in them what we're talking about here, which is basically a long game? Like this idea that when you send out a press release, there's an expectation. Well, you tell me that there's going to be an immediate return on that communication, like whether it's an article in print, whether it's a review, whatever. Or do you tell them actually, no, it's a drip feed that will pay off one day? What do you?
I mean, a big thing that I've put in my notes for the answer is like PR is not a short-term fix for anything. So when we draft a release on a new product thing, yes, we kind of know where it's going to be placed for the short term, but then understanding, especially those long-form opportunities, which a lot of people want to be in, is not something that we can just pick up unless I know for a fact that the story has that really like beautiful cachet of a hook that we just know is going to get that sort of bigger piece. I know where those are going to kind of land, and I can workshop those with the client and we can massage the messaging and then we can direct it where it needs to go. But by no means am I ever guaranteeing that because we've written a release about your new product and it's going to be a new vintage, that it's going to instantly land in any of your pages. And I think that's advice for everyone is like PR is not a short-term thing. You can do like little stop gaps with little events, or if there's an award or something that you feel is special, there's definitely areas for that. But brand awareness is not an instant hit. Like it is long work that your PR person, yourselves, and with other stakeholders across the media need to work out for a long time.
Yeah.
So Brian, while I've got you there, and so let's talk about media releases and press releases, and maybe go back to basics. You know, why are they important, and what's the purpose of them, and what are some basic tips maybe that you can give to help people get some messages across or get traction in some ways?
Yeah, like the workshop we had together before this webinar was like, do a little Google on some media release examples. Like that's a great start. But the like very bare crux of it all is just like when you're telling a story, you need to tell the who, what, when, where, why, and how sort of thing. Like, how do you go to this event? How do you buy tickets? How do you buy the wine? How do you get to the cellar door? A lot of that stuff gets missed. And then when you've got, I would just dot point those things out as a first go. Like, don't even start writing the release, like just dot point those answers to yourself and then start threading the story together. And I think that's where the craft comes into it if you're a great writer. And then all of those additional tools that I think we can cover off in a little bit is like, do you have a really great, beautiful editorial image that is high resolution and suitable for print and online? Like that is very essential. Bottle shots, like flat bottle shots with a nothing background, like they are suitable in some places, but do I want to look at that on your Instagram? Probably not. So I think just like having all the pieces of a story, like open up a newspaper and see all the elements of what that story is, and do you have all of those pieces together? It is just basically where you need to get started. Yeah.
Can I add something on the craft of that? As writers, we expect press releases that come from people who work in the media, public relations people, to be really quite well written. But we don't expect press releases, or even if it's just an email from a winery, we don't expect them to be perfectly crafted. Winemakers make wine. You know, we tell stories, and I'm quite happy to be communicated with, this is happening, here's the who, here's the what, here's the when. Would you like some samples? Do you want to come down and have a chat to the winemaker? That's enough. Like, sometimes a press release isn't even needed. That we have different levels of expectation depending on who is offering the information.
And if I could expand on that, to my point before about building the rapport before you've got something you need, can make that so much easier. If I've had a connection with someone's emailed saying, this is us, we want to start a relationship with you and talk about what can happen in the future. If then down the line, I get a very brief email like that says, hey, Tom, blah, 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 then it's an easier thing to connect to as well, because we already have this thing, right? It's not like just receiving something out of the blue and suddenly kicking off. You're sort of ready to go, and it makes it easier in the long term.
So I wonder if there is a trade-off in some ways between professionalism and being real in the way you communicate to the wine media. You know, sometimes being professional, you might get the who, what, where quickly, but you might not get it in a way that feels real to you and is enticing for you, or gives you the hook to come back and say, you know, do you want to go back and speak to this person? Would that be right?
It depends. To quote Max, it depends.
Yeah.
It depends.
Yeah.
But like, we'll get feedback from some clients on media releases that they need to be very like verbose and like lots of adjectives describing how beautiful and premium something is. But that's not what these are. Like, these are not advertising tools. These are essentially fact sheets on information about a news event that needs to go out to these types of people. And that doesn't include really flowery language. Like, if you read a quote out loud and it sounds like to you like a robot said it, delete the quote. Like, just don't have it, because it's not providing you any service, actually probably hurting you. So I think just looking at the releases that, you know, your PR person writes or yourself writes, like, read it out loud. Is it delivering facts? And then if it does require a bit of color because there's a funness to the brand or whatever it may be, then do it. But only if it's really going to provide a service when you're delivering it to the media person that needs to receive it.
Excellent. Maybe while we're just on media releases, probably to the three journalists there, are images important, and how do you want them? Maybe use this as an opportunity get that message across.
Very strong feelings about this. I would like some reasonably high res images, usually a range of landscape and portrait shots. Most websites will run landscape mostly. Look, they can be taken on your iPhone if that's how it rolls, but they still have to be good images. It's wonky, it's out of focus. Unfortunately, very few publications have budgets for photographers anymore, and it's something that I'm really sad about. I wish I could send a photographer out, but it's not up to me. And if I'm given a link, a Dropbox link that doesn't have a password on it that I can just give to my editor, happy days. So yeah, high res, 3 to 5 meg at least, in a Dropbox with the link, perfect.
And I would add to that, investing in photography is just never wasted money. This is so true. There's no budgets anymore, hardly any budgets for original photography, but publications do want original photographs. So if you are getting a photographer to take pictures, whether it's of the vineyard, cellar door, and I'm separating this from high res, just plain background bottle shots, as Brian mentioned before, which are essential. You just have to have them for any kind of reviews. Get the photographer to take multiple angles, multiple images, so that even if everybody, if 3 publications online, whatever, run pictures of your cellar door, each of those pictures is different. So you can still supply exclusive and original imagery, even though you've had the same photographer take the image on the same day. I'd also, this is from the editors, not me, hugely important is captions. Good captions. Tell me who the people are in the photographs, in the file name, and who took the photograph. Depends on your commercial arrangement with your photographer, but very often the photographers stipulate that they want a credit. So every time that photograph is published anywhere, even though you have paid for them, you're the producer, you've paid for those photographs, it's a good thing to do. This depends. Brian will be able to give us more insight here. But the photographer needs a credit too. So basically the rule of thumb is make sure all the information I could possibly want is at your fingertips, so that even if you don't have captions on those file names, and I say, who is that person on the left there in that photograph? And it won't be me, it'll be a picture editor asking that question, you are able to turn around and answer immediately. So have all the information at your fingertips, and don't go on leave the minute after you press send on your press release. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, I was about to say that I'm nowhere near the photography side of things. It's all copy, but all I know is that any editor, a little bit like Nola's remarks, they almost cry tears of joy when you send this link on, because it's so helpful. But also that's going to speed up publication of your piece. It's going to get you out there quicker. It's going to get you on the piece, right? If it's a multi sort of producer piece, and those that jump on that and get that to us quickly, and often, we forget to ask or something. We're so focused on copy, but it does mean things, better exposure for you in the long run, or in the short term, but in the long run as well.
Couple more things on that. Just embedding a link to the Dropbox imagery in the initial press release, I've found enormously helpful, because coming back to this time thing, in some instances, I might not actually write about what you've told me about for months. It might be 6 months. You've told me about something, let's say it's a new example of an alternative grape variety, and you're one of a handful of people that do it. On its own, that's not a story. But if I then subsequently 6 months later or 3 months later taste 2 other ones that are really good examples, that's a story. Here's 3 new good examples of insert grape variety here. And then I think, oh, that person who told me about that 3 months ago and sent me a sample, they gave me a Dropbox link at the time. Thank God, it's going to make my life easier. I can just, as Nola said, just forward that on, and I've forgotten what the other thing is.
So let's just tease out that timeline thing. So what sort of timelines do you work to? Do you need to be flexible? Do we need to give you plenty of time before we tell you something's going on? What's the answer? And I know what Max is going to say. It depends.
Yeah, come back to me, because the others will very quickly. So for the financial review, for Jancis Robinson, it's very quick turnaround. So if I file copy on something on a Friday, it's going live on Jancis on the Monday, for example. That can be that quick. For the financial review, the weekly column is about, I need to file copy 10 days in advance. So I need to even start thinking about that way before then. And for the financial review magazine, it's 6 weeks in advance. So I've just filed recently, very late, June issue copy, and I'm working on now July issue. So, and that's in modern digital world, that sounds like ridiculously long lead times, but that's the reality of my situation.
Yeah, similar for me. As I mentioned before, I'm a freelancer, but just to use Halliday Wine Companion as an example, who I do a lot of work for, if we're looking at something that's to run in print, I'm looking at 3 to 4 months in advance, especially if I'm formulating a feature idea, which, as Max said, I might see one thing and then see another one and another story that's, I'm like, okay, cool, now we have an idea. So, you know, it is a really, really long game. But if it's something that's digital and I pitch a story to Jamie, my digital editor at Halliday, I could probably run that up in a couple of hours and we could have it online that day. So it really just depends how quick it is, how easy it is, how enthusiastic I am about the idea, how much time I have when it comes in. But yeah, long lead can work months and months and months in advance. Absolutely.
Well, years. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, I remember what I was going to say before about photographs. In the paper at the Fin Review or the magazine, they're going to run 1 or 2. But if you send 12 killer photographs, they're going to run all of them online because there's no restriction. And the more you send of original, beautiful photographs, the better the story looks. The other thing is with like one winemaker's talking to me at the moment about a legacy, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, like a legacy wine that they're making as a tribute to a wine that was made 50 years ago. They haven't even thought about picking those grapes yet. So that wine is not going to even hit the shelves for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And the winemaker's already started talking to me about this because it's a great idea, right? That's the kind of long game that sometimes we're working in.
I think coming back to that idea of having your media list and notes beside it, this is a great example, right? If you want something in Decanter, then in Decanter magazine, then you need to know of these lead times. If it's something for Jancis or, you know, I write for Jasper Morris, like that's going to be quick. It's digital. It's, you know, I provide, they publish. So having that as your understanding, depending on what you're targeting, is really critical. And, you know, for Decanter, I wrote a piece on By Far, and I visited By Far in October. It was a profile piece. It was published early April. And that's not always like that, but, you know, they really wanted it in the magazine instead of digital. So that delays things. And so, yeah, it is knowing, again, having some understanding of your target publication to ensure that you sort of tie into those time frames.
Okay, good. Why don't we ask a couple of specific questions to a few of you? So, Brian, maybe I'm going to double your question. So what's the role of the PR agency? And you've given some of the answer to that, but maybe also as a second part, what's the best way for a wine company to work with the PR agency to be successful?
Yeah, the role in terms of our work in the PR space, like we provide a lot of consultation to a lot of our clients that just need some assistance in developing what their sort of unique brand voice is, to throw out a bit of jargon. I guess when you work brand side, and I, you know, was involved brand side before, you kind of get caught up in the Kool-Aid that everything you do is amazing and special and unique. So I think having an outside consultant is really beneficial in that it provides you a view that says, actually, here's 10 other people that are doing something quite similar, and here's maybe where you can maybe steer this to make it a little bit more special to yourself. So that's a lot of consultation that we provide. And again, we're the conduit between the media and producers. Like, I see my job as not only just trying to amplify what my clients are doing, but then also helping my journalist mates make sure that they're not getting fed a lot of shit. Sorry to say that, but just being the filter that prevents them from getting stuff that they potentially don't need to receive. And there's a lot evolving in the PR space where now, especially in online, we're almost becoming really kind of integrated into that point of sale opportunity. So like stories now will have direct links to seller doors. So making sure that in your news release, you have where the things are available and how people can get involved actually can drive that level of engagement and conversion. So PR is becoming a sort of greater and more powerful tool in that sort of conversion space, which it used to not be. It used to just be big awareness stuff, and now we're actually driving an engagement level. And I think good PRs always think about that consumer experience from how they get engaged with the brand through to how they buy a brand. So from my recommendations and ways of like working with the PR agency, again, it's not a short-term fix. Yes, we can do flashy news releases that get a few bits of placements and everyone's happy, but having that sort of long-term awareness piece is a strategy you should always approach that with a PR. Engaging PRs early, telling us you have an event in 2 weeks and that you want to get a lot of people there is probably not going to be successful for you. And I don't think a PR that tells you they can do it is really going to give you the benefit that you want. Being very specific in, just back on that sort of early piece, engaging them early also gives the opportunity to then think about these long-term opportunities that you potentially haven't thought about. So there can guide you on creative angles or steer you in the right direction with messaging and make sure that it's consistent and clear all the way through. I think a lot of times you can get very broad in terms of your briefs, like we want to get mass awareness or we want to make this famous. It's like, that's like, good luck to you. I think you need to be very specific in terms of when you're working with your PR company, like who specifically do you want to reach? What do you want to make them think and feel and do? And what are the different ways they can engage with your story or experience? Because trying to reach a lot of people across a lot of platforms, you can probably see yourself not landing in the spaces you want to be in, where if you had a really strong story and a really strong engagement tool and landing in the right spaces, you'll engage a much more engaged community with your brand message. Yeah, and my last point is just like be authentic and true to yourself. And my example for this at the moment is like sustainability. Like everyone is saying like, we farm sustainably and we're a sustainable company. And it's like, okay, how? Like, tell me how. And I think having those proof points that make things real to you and adding a layer of like your passion to it just makes the story a little bit more believable, a lot more believable. PRs can't put glitter on crap and serve it up as, you know, a 3-course meal. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, being authentic and true to yourself and your passions, but then also doing things authentically will just give yourself a better result in PR.
Thanks for that. Don't forget to ask some questions. We've got some good ones in there already, but if you've got more, feel free to use the Q&A button. You talked a bit about filtering, and I'm going to ask this question to Nola. How do we as the industry sort of, again, I think we'll use some words that we discussed in our pre-conversation, filter the shit out before we send stuff through to you as wine journalists?
Yep, definitely have a response to that. I'm going to also preface that with saying only so much crap has to be filtered out. Like, we are storytellers. It is my job to figure out what the story is, and I'm not going to punish someone who's trying to communicate with me and perhaps not doing it in the most effective way. I'm not going to punish them if the story comes sort of tucked in with a whole bunch of sort of shit. But as Tom was sort of saying before, you know, looking for that point of excitement. And I call it the point of astonishment. So if you think, this is how I approach writing a story. If you think you have a story that everybody should know, so it's not just, okay, we as a winery have a story we would like Nola as a journalist to tell. It is, you have a story that you would like Nola to tell because lots of people want to know about it. That's the end goal of the media, is that ideally lots of people are going to read about it. So this story you want to tell, is there something about it that's, where's your "oh, cool" moment? You know, what's that point of astonishment? And I use this as a technique as a journalist if I'm writing about, let's say I'm writing out a profile of a producer and I've spent days with them and I have so much information about them and I don't know how to start my story. It's a Word document with a blinking cursor. I look for the point of astonishment. What is the most exciting thing? And I start there. And if you were thinking, I need to get this message out to journalists, look for the most exciting thing and start there.
Good. Maybe we might circle back to something we discussed right at the start, and we talked about exclusivity and maybe even about working with embargoes. And maybe I might ask your thoughts about that, and I'll start with you, Max.
Well, as I said before, we're all looking for that astonishing story or an astonishing angle to something that everybody thought they knew. So if we can get it first, or if we can run it first, or then great. It depends what it is. Some people approach me with this offer of exclusivity on things that are not astonishing, and I have to politely decline. So if you can, like, but then you need to target with that. Like, so for example, not a wine, a whiskey producer came up to me recently with, we're about to go for this public float or whatever the story, and it's happening next week, and A, it's too late to talk to me, and B, I'm not the person you need to talk to. Let me pass you on to the business journalist that isn't a proper angle for them. Embargoes, look, I'm in two minds about the embargoes. I go along with them because it's not really going to make any difference to anything, because at the end of the day, it's just a bottle of wine usually. And it's not like it's a political embargo or an embargo on a news story that it has the potential to, cause damage or something like that. Having said that, if you are going to ask for an embargo, make it really, really clear what that embargo is, because I had an example recently of a new product that had a celebrity, quite a well-known celebrity attached to it. And when my story ran online a couple of days before the embargo date, which is when it was going to run in print, there was a bit of a kerfuffle about the PR person was getting heat from the celebrity's agent and all that kind of stuff. So if you do want an embargo on it, and do it politely and make sure that it's very, very clearly communicated. That would be my point about that.
Either of you two want to add to that?
Tom and I are probably very similar in that we write long form features that take months to sort of put together. So it's not
not so
really, but it's also not something that can be dangled as a carrot, I don't think. So, here we'll give you this story first. And I'm like, well, that's lovely, but it's still not a very good story. So I don't really want it first or last, like it's, I guess, one of Max's sort of it depends scenario. But I mean, a lot of my ideas are sort of self-generating because I do write features. But, for an example, it's not a wine example, but there's a new restaurant opening in Hobart and I'm writing about it this week, and the story will run a couple of days before the restaurant opens, and I might not be the first to publish that story, but I know I'll publish the whole story. And my editor was happy with that, that I didn't negotiate an exclusive with the PR that I was working with. I was just happy to wait until a new menu would be finalized and I could have the interior photographed. So yeah, I don't think in wine media exclusives or embargoes have a much weight with me personally. I don't know, Tom?
No, you're absolutely spot on in terms of writing features. It just doesn't come into play for me. It may in the future, but at this point it hasn't. And I totally echo Max's remarks. It's just a bottle of wine. So really, I mean, they're almost laughable to be really honest at the moment. But no, hasn't come into play for me yet.
The flip side of that, though, is at the other end of the chain, where you've got a wine and I'm keen to write about it, and I tell you when this article is going to be published, and by that point the wine is sold out or close to being sold out. So despite what I said before about it being a long game, and even though you contact me this week, I might not run something for 6 months. Then it becomes a question. Then it's up to me, actually. The onus is on me to come back to you and say, hey, that wine you sent me, is that going to be still available if this is published on this date? So it is there's no point sending out, and Brian will have a view on this. There's no point sending out the information after the horse is bolted. It is a balancing act of, you don't want to send it out too early and then insist on an embargo, and you don't want to send it out too late when everything's sold out, if that's the angle of the story.
Okay, good. Will, I might get you to put those slides up. We've got some examples of some good and bad bits of press, but maybe while he's putting that up, I might ask a question, and I might address this to you first, Tom. It comes from the audience. We're talking about artificial intelligence and how will AI affect your work, and taking personal connections and relationships out of the picture. Will AI be supportive or a threat of miscommunication in the future?
Oh, I think there's certainly a threat of miscommunication. Absolutely. I don't feel as up in arms and concerned as maybe a lot of people are. I mean, you know, and yes, taking out the personal connection and relationship, if you look at it, you know, like I just talked about going to by far, I don't know if anyone can replicate that. I can do that. I can go and give them my view and take in everything from a sensory perspective and have interesting chats with Nick Farr and, you know, revel in being this place that's impossible to get into. I mean, that's, you know, that's not going anywhere. So I don't feel this same sort of threat that a lot of people do. I think that I'm yet to actually make the most of AI. I think it's going to be incredibly helpful in some ways. But at the end of the day, you know, it's really just taking a bunch of human thoughts and collating them. So I am a human, so I have those thoughts. That's good news for me. But I can sort of add my own identity to them. So I don't feel concerned. I feel actually that there are facets of, I think there's probably a lot of lazy writing that will be stamped out by AI. I think there's just a lot of those quick put together kind of things. But in terms of, you know, those writers that are aiming to tell a story with depth and with experience attached and obviously tasting, I don't feel there's any major threat. It's just going to be a really helpful tool until it takes over the world and we all, you know, perish.
Max, you want to talk through your examples of some good and bad bits of correspondence?
Yeah, just very briefly, because we're running out of time. And without wanting to, you know, without giving Brian the right of reply, I reckon Brian's feeling more threatened about AI than journalists are. Are you, Brian, very quickly?
Some of the prompts I get back from people saying, edit it to this, I can read AI like a stink. It's so obvious. So I think if you guys can read it and we can read it and the world can see it as dystopian, then I think we'll be okay for a little bit.
And it's actually a nice segue into this. So when we were discussing this before the webinar, we discussed the idea. I thought that I'd had a couple of recent examples of good and not so good communication. So this is a good example of somebody just reaching out. This isn't a press release. This is just one of those, what Tom described, you know, just saying, hi, here I am. You might not have tasted our wines for a while. We know that you've got a connection with us already. Would you like to taste something? No pressure. Like, that's just such a beautifully, and it's really well put together. This, you know, this does have a sense of a real person just being true to themselves. And this is written in a voice that I can kind of hear as being a true person. And I've responded very positively. Yes, absolutely. I want to taste that older Riesling with the new one. You know, so this is one good example. If we can go to the next one. And you haven't got time to read all this now, but essentially this is somebody getting in touch. I think this was through my website. This wasn't even a direct email. And this is like, absolutely not. I don't want coverage from this. I just wanted to put us on your radar. Now, this is a really good example of, in this case, I think it's an Australian only bottle shop. And in Narnia, it's funny. This is anonymized, obviously. And so this is a really good example of, I've just tucked that away, right? So if I come across somebody opening an Australian only booze shop, then there's two. And as Nola said before, you kind of need three, and suddenly it's a trend. So this is going to be tucked away. And if they're across the country, that's even better, because I've got a national audience. And if I get three, then there's a feature story. So this is a person just planting a seed of an idea in a very affable, reaching out way. Now, as it happened, I responded and they gave me a whole heap more information. So we've kind of just laid the groundwork for what might become, might not, a story in the future, as opposed to the next couple of examples. And we've decided not to anonymize one of those. I love that first one. Here's what's happening. Here's a press release. Bang. Right. No faff. No, hope you're well. No, Victoria Bitter has launched this highly anticipated first major advertising campaign. It's just, this is what's happened. Here's more information. Right. You're a professional. I'm a professional. If you want to watch some ads, bang, here we are. That was actually meant to be in the good example.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, no, that's
Get that now.
that's
the
why
next
I didn't
one, though,
anonymize it.
is an example of the not so good. We met, right? Okay, that's fine. You're creating that personal connection. I'm representing a well-known Australian brand and was hoping to send you a sample. It's like, no, I'm very time poor. Don't make me come back with a, what brand is it? And why aren't you telling me what brand? Aren't you in the job of communicating about your brand? I get this a bit. I get this. It's a very hush-hush brand release and I can't tell you anything. No, just tell me. And the last one, quick note, see if you could send across an address for a gift. No, because you're making me work. You're making me come back to you and say, who's the client? What's the gift? Do I want it? Am I interested? I don't understand why you wouldn't just tell me what it is and et cetera, et cetera. And most importantly, it's not a gift. It's not a gift. If you're sending me something, it's a sample, it's a professional relationship that we have. You're sending me something for professional review. I don't want your gifts. It's a work thing, not a friendly thing. I've got a bit carried away there, sorry, but these are examples of good and bad communications. These are beautifully brief, but not the kind of thing I'm hoping for.
And Nola, do you want to actually, sorry, Max, why don't you?
I flagged this already. Never use highly anticipated. If I see it, I'm almost at the point where if there's highly anticipated in the first line, I'm just deleting. Looking forward to working with you on this. No, we're not actually working together on this. There's a professional relationship, but I'm not working with you on your PR campaign. Don't expect feedback from me. I haven't got time. If you're just reaching out, you've already reached out. You don't need to say you're reaching out, and don't say I would like to do something. Just say I'm doing something. Just be active in your voice, not kind of passive. We already talked about going on leave, and we already talked about being prepared. So I think we've ticked that one off, Angus.
Good. And Nola, we talked about some good examples, and you gave one particularly good one of a bad one where a marketeer sort of maybe bent the truth a little bit. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah. Do you want the good one and the bad one, or just the bad one?
Yeah, both of them, please.
I'll make it really quick. Actually, one thing I just want to pick up on that we haven't talked about here at all that's really important is that the relationship between the wineries and the media is not transactional. So I'm sure we all do in this forum get a lot of somewhat misguided, can we please send you a case of our wine in exchange for review? Can we invite you to this event in exchange for coverage? And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. And it's this, we all work in wine. There's a lot of wine around us. Free wine is not an incentive to me to write a story. A free dinner is not an incentive for me to write a restaurant review, because what I actually really need is a glass of water and a bowl of salad, and not to open another bottle of wine. And it is such a privileged position to be in. But yeah, I think it's really important to note that it's not a transaction. It's not a deal between the winery and the media. So my good one, I live here in Tasmania, and I get overlooked a lot for journalists on the mainland, even though I write for the same national publications that journalists that live on the mainland do. And whatever region your winery is in, you could probably apply this sort of theory. But a well-known brand here, we're organising a tasting of museum releases, and before they picked the date and bought plane tickets for journalists on the mainland, they just rang me and asked if there was a day I was around in this particular time frame where I could come along. And I was like, happy days, I can get the bus to that winery, so good times. And it was just really nice to have been asked first. So the local journalists to you, while they might not be writing for the AFR, or they might not have a column in Halliday, they're probably very important sort of assets to talk to. So that was a really nice experience. My bad experience, which sort of comes with the crux of journalists don't like to be lied to. Please don't lie to us, or lying by omission. We find happens a lot, that something might just be not mentioned. And recently I was on a little fact-finding mission looking at a huge company that had moved some assets around. So I just wanted to know, did company X still own this winery in this area, or had they sold it and were they then leasing another winery? Just very simple, no huge expose. And I know for a fact that it had been sold, but I needed it from a primary source. I couldn't just take a story off the AFR. And it took me 5 emails to get the truth. And I had to really keep pushing. And I was just so annoyed at the end because this big company was skirting around to protect their brand story. But I just wanted the truth. So yes, that's my bad story.
Okay. Thank you all. Will, I'll get you to take those slides off. We're coming to the end. We've got a whole bunch of questions. And what I'm going to say to you is if we don't answer the question now, we will answer them. I'll send the note out to the panelists and we'll answer them and I'll send them back to you as part of the follow-up from this meeting. But there's a good one here. What is your advice to a newcomer to the wine writing space? I haven't had much success pitching to publications. Is this because there's no room for new writers? Or is it because maybe my pitches are ineffective? Maybe if you want to throw some comments out there, again, happy anyone who wants to jump in.
Oh, I feel
Well,
like there's a whole other panel on that one.
Yeah. I think the initial question was, what's the advice as a new writer? I'm relatively new, so I'm positioned to talk about this. I think certainly don't hesitate to reach out to people that are doing the things you want to do. I had coffee with Max Allen 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, and I said, "What should I do, Max?" And he said, "You're doing it." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." Sometimes you just need a chat with someone. So just reach out and be a little bit, I'd say, a little bit audacious. Don't hold back because you haven't got anywhere yet. You've just got to keep going. I'm a tenacious little something, and I have emailed everybody in my journey, from Jancis Robinson, who's kindly responded every time, to Max, to Campbell Mattinson. Nola's helped me over the course of my career a lot. It's just about reaching out and don't hesitate at all to ask for a coffee with someone, or what did you do that I'm not doing? It's really that simple, I think. And of course, during that conversation, I think that's when we can talk about, well, how have you pitched and what are your ideas, and have you got the right angles and things like that. But it's just about making the most of those around you. And again, to the same point from earlier, I would absolutely love to hear from someone that's in this space. I've done it. I would love to share what I did. Not that I'm any sort of beacon of hope, but I mean, I've been there and I'd love to talk to people about it. So it's just about communicating to those that are doing maybe what you want to do.
Brian, do you think the messaging stories need to change for the no-low space? Would this market require a completely different approach to a more traditional wine audience? What's your view on that?
Or like if you are a non-alc drink that wants to pretend to be a wine, then sure, talk like a wine. It's really around who you want to reach. Not that I appreciate much of the non-alc wine that's out there at the moment, but yeah, I think it's around who you want to reach, what kind of brand message you want to curate, and then finding the channels that fit well. There's lots of drinks out there that aren't pretending to be wine or spirits or anything, and they're finding really engaging communities of people that love it, and lots of great publications are picking up on that. So it is really around what type of brand you want to create, and yeah, and creating the messaging from there.
So I've written quite a bit about this space over the last few years, and I treat it exactly the same way. Is it a good story? Well, A, is the product good? Like if it's a feature I did recently on Tina and Itota, which I think are two of the best non-alc brands, neither of which are wine or trying to be wine. And it was exactly the same principle. Is it a good product? Does it have a good story? Does it contribute to the conversation, a cultural conversation? Tick, 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 exactly the same way. I think that if it's a good product, it's a good product with a good story, it's worth writing about.
Excellent. Look, I think we're going to end it up here, and I will endeavour to get all those other questions answered. And again, I apologise, but it's a compliment to the panellists, and again, they're good questions, so we will endeavour to answer them. We really hope you've enjoyed this webinar. I'm going to mention two upcoming events that I should. Firstly, the Direct to Consumer Symposium, which will be held in Sydney on the 25th of June. It's now an annual event. It's an exciting opportunity for us to come together and talk about the growth of the direct to consumer market. You'll see that on our website. The second one is our next webinar, which is How Do Consumption Occasions Influence Sale? It's presented by Andrew Nowilke, who's the co-founder and commercial director of Growth Scope. And he'll try to answer the questions of outlining why the liquor consumption occasions are so important in driving brands, sales, and business success, provide an overview of what consumption occasions are, and highlight how one-size-fits-all approach to understanding all occasions is fundamentally flawed, and identify the linkage between consumption occasions and shopper behaviour, and therefore of using the occasions understanding to inform successful channel planning and shopper marketing strategies. Both events are already listed on our WCA website. Feel free to have a look at them. Thank you again very much to Nola, to Max, to Tom, to Brian. Thank you very much for your time. We'll see you all again. Thank you and have a good day.
See ya.
See ya.
Bye-bye.